Great, excellent. So I want to tell you that the original idea here was to do a case study of a solution that we had in mind to the common problem of users not behaving in the way that librarians or publishers might like them to. Didn't quite work out that way, and I'll get into that a bit more in a moment. But we were interested in the reasons that users go someplace other than their library to get content. We're characterizing that as the wrong foot in this case. Those include authentication challenges, confusing search results, and also the appeal of sources like ResearchGate and Sci-Hub. So the solution that we had in mind that we thought we might do a case study on was to bring the users to the library. And this was inspired in large part by some, I think, goals that we probably all share, that users should use the resources that librarians have paid for, that the version of record of the article has added value over what might be, what users might be able to find from other resources, and that it would be a good idea to keep users away from sources that might hack their credentials. So that was the right path goal. It turned out to be a little bit of wishful thinking. So as I mentioned, we had a solution in mind, and this solution involved search engine optimization and some web page design. We set to work on building this for the purpose of a case study, using some OpenAthens technology and using some technology of another major library vendor. But we unfortunately found that the technology pieces wouldn't play nicely together in the way that we thought. That's probably a solvable problem. If we were to move forward and launch this live, we think we could make it work. But we decided, given the challenges that we're facing, we decided to shift gears a little bit and turn this from a case study into a virtual focus group. Doing a survey of users with a mock-up of what the solution might have looked like. So we did a focus group of some graduate students worldwide, and I'm going to go over the results here for you. I'm going to warn you that the results were not exactly what we were hoping for. I think I know we were a little bit disappointed and frustrated, and I think some of you might be as well. But I think we did get some valuable insights through this whole process, so I think it's worth taking a look at. So I do want to, before I get into the details here, give some acknowledgments. Letty Conrad, a scholarly kitchen chef, who many of you might know, did the core end user research, user testing that I'll be showing here. And this, the idea was inspired in part by conversations that I had with Michiel van der Heijden at Springer Nature regarding how and why some users might prefer ResearchGate over alternatives, and also a fascinating conversation that Karen Prince and I had I think it was at the London Book Fair a couple of years ago that we talked about how users navigate through Google search results, and that was also one of the underlying inspirations behind this idea. Then I want to acknowledge all of the customers of Reprint's Desk who have provided countless anecdotes of their end users not doing what they want them to do, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit. So the virtual focus group that we did involved 14 postgraduate researchers at universities in the UK, US, Canada, and Australia. We did this via usertesting.com. We presented them with a known item search, and we recorded how they responded. Sorry, I should say we presented them with the results of a known item search. And then we recorded how they responded to those to the mock-up search results, which brought them to live web pages. And then we gave them some survey questions after the fact. The postgraduate researchers came from the universities that you see on the screen here. And here is an example of what the mocked up search results look like. I don't know if any of you are familiar with usertesting.com, but it enables you to essentially do an online user test. So this, of course, looks like a Google search results page, and it leads to different options, different web pages that the user might visit to try to get access to the article. The PubMed search results, I'm guessing that many of you are familiar with this, but maybe not. PubMed search results all look more or less like this. You can reach this, put in almost any DOI into Google, and if it's any form of medical content, you're likely to get this as one of your search results. We also included ResearchGate in every search result. The ResearchGate results consistently look like this. This particular example shows a request full text button in the upper right. If I remember correctly, there are 3 different ways that ResearchGate might present a pathway to the article. This is one of the most common, where the user will have to request the article from the author. There are many other cases where the content might be hosted and ready to download. We also included something that we call article pages. This is kind of the core of our idea of what we might present as a solution. This article page offers a redirect to the university login for that user's institution. It offers a link directly to the journal website where the DOI resolves to. Also offers an option to rent or buy the article from Reprint's desk. And most importantly, there's an open access link. This is to a third-party repository. One of the anecdotes that we often hear from our library customers is that users don't do a thorough job of searching for open access content. And so one of the ideas we had in mind is, can we help guide users to third-party open access content that they so often seem to be missing? And if you've ever faced that challenge yourself, I think there's some, there's some interesting, but I think solvable problems there. As I mentioned, the publisher websites were also included in all of the results. Here's a quick look at the variety of what those DOI targets look like. So then we submitted, or we asked, after the users went through the process of trialing where they would go to with each of those search results, we asked them to answer some survey questions. These are the questions that we presented to them. And you might think that I would be able to present you with statistical results. I'm not going to. We actually could have. We could have put together statistics regarding which users went where, and but we found that some users were extremely thorough. Other users were not thorough at all, and maybe just tried one option. Maybe they found what they wanted straight away, or they gave up. So because of this, we felt that the statistics wouldn't be meaningful, and instead we went through the written results of the survey questions and the audio and video from the users, watched what they did, listened to their commentary, and came up with some quotes and observations and highlights. So that's what I'm going to show you as the result here. So here are some of the here's a sampling of some of the quotes. I think that some of these speak to the value of aggregation and the familiarity of the PDF as the target. But I think the last quote typifies what we saw with many of the users. Sorry, not the last, but the last one. It's the next to last is typical of many of the users not using the library as their starting point. And instead just looking to see first via Google search if they could find a downloadable PDF. We further found that the users we queried preferred, in many cases, to search Google and ResearchGate first, with the library being the third choice. A lot of that had to do with consistency and familiarity. There's a consistency in the ResearchGate results, as there is with PubMed. And if the user is already familiar with that option, that might seem like a better choice to them. Some of the other things that we saw through this process that didn't surprise us, but were still a little bit frustrating and disappointing. Logins are not popular. Users were, in many cases, prepared to ask a colleague for a paper before going through the trouble of authenticating. Some users were willing to opt for alternate articles rather than pay for the article. That's not necessarily a surprise, but I was a little surprised to hear that how many users were willing to consider alternate articles on their topic. And as mentioned, users really prefer PDFs for their familiarity and consistency and ease of use. So I think it's noteworthy that when presented with these search results, many of the users would cherry pick what they wanted first, which was very often PubMed and ResearchGate, familiar pathways. Users ignored unfamiliar sites, and our article page experiment was an unfamiliar site to these users. Not a single user had a familiarity with it. We were, however, happy to find that not a single user mentioned Sci-Hub or any related pirate site. We were careful not to mention these options include them in the search results or mention them in our questions. However, we also deliberately asked the questions in a very open-ended manner, thinking that we might get some mentions of Sci-Hub, but we were glad to find that we didn't. And as I mentioned, we included third-party open access versions in the article page results. We found that only one user out of the 14 followed that pathway to the third-party open access version, which was one of the other things that we're a little bit disappointed to find. So I'll leave you with these. What I think are the core lessons from this investigation. But I'll just point out on that ResearchGate page that we looked at, there was a request full text link. One of the things that we wanted to test, we heard an anecdote that some users are sort of unwilling to out themselves. The visibility on ResearchGate to other researchers might be a deterrent to some users. So we were specifically trying to test that. That never came up. That didn't seem to be the case. I think another key point here that we learned is how many users are really impatient. The number of users that did a thorough job of looking at the search results was pretty low. Most of the users that we tested cherry-picked the results they wanted and didn't explore the other options very thoroughly at all. And that's the last slide. Any questions?
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Scott. We've got time for, I think, just for one question. We're coming up to the next case study quite quickly, but we do have one question come in. Why do you think users state that PDFs are easy to use? PDFs are difficult to read on screen, are often not accessible, and sometimes need to be printed. Why is that considered a good digital experience? I'm not saying you should have.
Yeah, look, I can't really answer that with my own expertise, other than to say that I know that the portability aspect of PDFs is something that users seem to value. Beyond that, I can't really say.
Sure. I think one of the most interesting things about your project is that it started through conversations, through interaction between two or more human beings. So I think that was a really interesting aspect to it. And there is one more question just come in as well. You mentioned trust a couple of times about what users were most inclined to follow. Did you get a sense of whether that was about a trust in the brand itself, or a familiarity with the process that it was kind of leading the users towards?
Good question. I think familiarity is probably we had more of the users use the word familiarity than trust. So I think it's really sort of both mashed together.
Sure. Okay, I think there may be one or two other questions just coming in, but we do have to move on to the next case study. So Scott, thanks ever so much for your participation, and maybe I'll see you at some trade event in the future.
Yes, thank you.